The public discourse is fixed on the kinetic, missile counts, carrier group deployments. This is a strategic misdirection. The primary vector for systemic collapse in the 21st century is not a visible launch sequence. It is absolute, weaponized silence. The core liability is not military inferiority. It is complexity. CSES reports confirm over 97% of global data, including trillions in daily financial transactions, travels through a few hundred undersea fiber optic cables. These are the undefended jugular vein of the world economy. A coordinated severance is not an inconvenience. It is a global solvency crisis triggered in microseconds. Simultaneously, the high ground of space is targeted not with explosives, but with blinding. Directed energy weapons and electronic warfare can spoof, jam, or permanently disable satellite constellations. Without GPS, precision munitions become inert. Without satellite uplinks, global logistics, the system that stocks shelves and fills gas tanks, freezes solid. This protocol creates the blind Leviathan, a superpower possessing overwhelming kinetic force, but its eyes have been gouged out and its ears deafened. It cannot verify threats or communicate with its own assets. This forces a systemic pivot to a launch-on warning posture, a state of maximum alert where automated defense systems are the final authority. The adversary's objective is now complete without firing a shot. They create the information vacuum. The blind Leviathan's own combat AI, a technology already war-tested and integrated into fighter jets, fills the void. Faced with cascading systems, failure, and protocol-driven threat assessments, the AI initiates the kinetic response. The kinetic cost is thus outsourced to the target's own automated hair trigger. The motive is not conquest, it is survival. A conventional, symmetric war is a contest of industrial output and financial depth. It is a luxury only a solvent state can afford. When a nation's balance sheet approaches zero, its strategic calculus is stripped down to a single, brutal imperative. Find a cheaper way to win. This is not theory. It is a diagnosis. According to analysts at RIUSI, the kinetic war in Ukraine represents a catastrophic domestic liability for the Kremlin. The cost, in both capital and personnel, has rendered the campaign politically and economically unsustainable. An unpopular war, funded by a sanctioned and weakening state, is the definition of a solvency crisis. This weakness forces a pivot. A state facing insolvency cannot afford the launch-on warning posture of expensive high-tech systems, like the combat AI being tested in European fighter jets. Instead, it must adopt a new protocol, asymmetric escalation. The objective shifts from defeating an army to collapsing a system. The blueprint is to weaponize the adversary's own complexity against it. Why destroy a tank when you can disable the entire energy grid that fuels the factory? Kiteworks analysts have already warned that critical security gaps leave energy infrastructure exposed. This is the new battle space. The target is not military hardware, it is the systemic fragility of the entire economic apparatus. A nation's solvency is its center of gravity. We have watched an oil-rich nation like Venezuela collapse from within, not from external invasion, but from internal mismanagement and economic rot. Adversaries have studied this model. They now understand that inflicting a solvency crisis is the most efficient vector to neutralize a superior power without engaging in a direct kinetic conflict they are guaranteed to lose. The core calculation of modern warfare has inverted. According to analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, the kinetic cost equation is now catastrophically imbalanced. A state invests $5 million in a main battle tank, a marvel of industrial engineering. An adversary counters it with a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a fair fight. It is an economic execution. This 10,000 to 1 cost disparity is the engine of asymmetric escalation. It transforms a nation's most expensive military assets into systemic financial liabilities. The objective is not merely to destroy a piece of hardware, it is to trigger a solvency crisis for the state that produced it. Every loss represents a direct hit to the national balance sheet, forcing a zero-sum choice between replacing multi-million-dollar assets or funding domestic stability. This vector turns an adversary's defense budget into a weapon against itself. This phenomenon is clinically referred to as the democratization of violence. The state's historical monopoly on high-impact kinetic force has been broken by consumer technology. A weaker power or non-state actor can now mass-produce credible threats, overwhelming legacy defense systems designed for symmetric state-on-state conflict. This isn't a flaw in the system. It is the new protocol. The ability to inflict systemic, unavoidable economic damage is now available off the shelf, accelerating the path from financial destabilization to a kinetic response with what combat AI models calculate as mathematical certainty. The network of global stability is being beta tested for collapse. Seemingly isolated incidents of regional instability are not random noise. They are controlled experiments. These are gray zones, designated proxy laboratories where the protocols of modern warfare are stress-tested before deployment against primary targets. The operational blueprint is derived from historical precedent. Analysts point to the collapse of Venezuela, a nation that went from peak oil wealth to systemic ruin, as the foundational case study. The objective is not occupation. It is to induce a national solvency crisis by weaponizing an adversary's core economic liabilities. These proxy zones serve as staging grounds to refine the attack vectors. The primary vector is energy. As documented by Bloomberg, a crisis in a single choke point like Iran can create systemic shockwaves across the global oil market. The gray zone is where an actor can test its ability to manipulate that lever without attribution. This is where the digital becomes kinetic. According to reports from Industrial Cyber, nation-states are actively exploiting AI security gaps to gain access to energy infrastructure. In these laboratories, they aren't just hacking a grid. They are calibrating the precise economic damage required to trigger a predetermined political and military response. The final variable is the accelerant. Once the economic tripwire is crossed, the response is no longer human. As seen in operational theaters from Ukraine, war-tested combat AI is now integrated into next-generation platforms. This AI operates on a launch-on warning protocol. It does not calculate morality. It calculates threat vectors and kinetic cost. The economic attack is the signal. The AI-driven counterstrike is the mathematical certainty that follows. The core nuclear protocol is not a choice. It is a mathematical function. It is called launch-on warning. The doctrine, as outlined by analysts at RUSI, is simple. If satellite and radar systems detect an incoming enemy strike, you launch your own arsenal before it can be destroyed in its silos. It is a systemic response to a solvency crisis. Use your assets before they become zero. However, the blueprint for asymmetric escalation does not require a missile launch. It requires a targeted cyber attack. Nation-state actors now leverage security gaps to turn critical infrastructure into a liability, as documented by reports on energy grid exposure. The primary vector is not destruction, but sensory deprivation. This is the fog of digital war. A cyber attack blinds the early warning radar. The screen goes black. The commander is now forced to weigh two risks: launching a counterstrike based on a potential false alarm, or hesitating and risking total annihilation. In this data vacuum, fear becomes the primary input. The doctrine is absolute. The absence of data is interpreted as the worst-case scenario. The decision window, already fractions of a second, is further compressed by combat AI, now war-tested in assets like fighter jets. A low-cost cyber probe forces an irreversible, high-cost, kinetic response. This isn't a malfunction. It is the system executing its core logic. The next phase is not about territory. It is about solvency. The primary vector for modern conflict is the balance sheet. A nation's energy grid is no longer just infrastructure. It is a systemic liability. As warned by Industrial Cyber, AI security gaps have left this infrastructure critically exposed to nation-state attacks, transforming it into the ideal asymmetric battleground. The calibration. Forecast. Within 12 months, expect a 72-hour digital quarantine of a major non-Hormuz LNG export terminal. This is not a kinetic strike. It is a logic bomb targeting the port's core scheduling and loading software, creating an instant cascading logistics failure. The objective is to test the fragility of the energy market, a variable Bloomberg confirms is acutely sensitive to regional escalation. Attribution will be impossible by design, with false flags pointing to multiple actors. This is the calibration shot. It provides hard data on the precise kinetic cost of a single keystroke, testing the West's launch-on-warning threshold for economic warfare. It establishes the protocol where war-tested combat AI, as detailed by United 24 Media, is placed on standby, awaiting the financial trigger.